Imagine spending 50 years walking into the darkness that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. And then, when your body begins to fail you, refusing to stop because you know the work is too important to abandon. Ed Warren had survived 5 decades of confronting demonic entities, malevolent spirits, and phenomena that would have broken lesser investigators. But in 2001, a stroke would present him with an adversary he could not simply pray away or command to leave in the name of God. The physical decline that followed marked not an ending, but a transformation in how one of the most renowned paranormal investigators in American history would continue the mission that had defined his entire adult life. By the time the 21st century arrived, Ed and Lorraine Warren were not merely investigators, but living institutions in the field of paranormal research. The New England Society for Psychic Research, founded in their modest Connecticut home in 1952, had grown into an organization with international recognition, thousands of documented cases, and relationships with clergy and professionals across the country and beyond. They had lectured at hundreds of universities, written books that brought their cases to millions of readers, and built a reputation that made their organization the first call when families faced phenomena they could neither understand nor control. The journey from young couple with curiosity and faith to the most respected names in American demonology had been long, demanding, and often dangerous. But Ed Warren had never wavered in his conviction that what they were doing mattered on a spiritual level that transcended academic acceptance or public skepticism. When the stroke came in 2001, it forced an adaptation in the Warren working methodology that had been refined across half a century of active field investigations. Ed could no longer walk into haunted houses with the physical stamina he had once possessed, could no longer spend entire nights in locations where malevolent presences manifested, could no longer perform the demanding physical aspects of field work that paranormal investigation requires. But what the stroke could not touch was the analytical mind that had become one of the most formidable resources in demonological assessment anywhere in the United States. His ability to classify entities, to recognize historical and theological patterns in reported phenomena, to recommend the appropriate level of spiritual intervention, and to distinguish between the merely unusual and the genuinely dangerous, remained as sharp as it had ever been. Lorraine understood immediately how their partnership would need to evolve. She would become the primary field investigator, conducting the on-site work with the same methodological rigor that Ed had designed and that they had practiced together for decades. She would document her observations, record witness interviews, perform her psychic walkthroughs of disturbed locations, and then bring everything back to Ed for the analytical assessment that remained the backbone of every NESPR case resolution. The case files from this final period reflect this adapted collaboration in their very structure. Lorraine's field notes appear in her distinctive voice, describing the conditions she encountered, the impressions she received through her clairvoyant sensitivity, and the witness testimony she collected. Then Ed's analytical commentary follows, sometimes handwritten in the earlier post-stroke years, later dictated when writing became too difficult, but always maintaining the precision and depth that a lifetime of demonological study had cultivated. Together, these dual perspectives produced documentation that lost none of its investigative value even as the physical capacity of one partner diminished. The cases that came to the Warren organization in these final years represented the full spectrum of paranormal phenomena they had encountered across their career. There were residual hauntings in historic New England properties, the kind of atmospheric phenomena that presented mystery but rarely danger. There were poltergeist cases in suburban homes where families reported objects moving, unexplained sounds, and the disruptive but generally non-malevolent activity that the Warrens had learned to recognize and address. And there were the cases that had always drawn the most serious Warren attention, the investigations involving demonic infestation, where the spiritual danger to families was real and immediate. On the occasions when Ed's health permitted his physical presence at an investigation site, those who witnessed his arrival described an experience that carried profound emotional weight. The man who came to these locations in his late 70s was recognizably the same person who had walked into haunted houses as a young man with a painting under his arm, looking to capture on canvas the atmosphere of places where the boundary between the living world and whatever lay beyond had grown thin. The curiosity was unchanged, though now informed by thousands of cases and a theological framework that had deepened with every investigation. The fundamental conviction that this work mattered, that it served families in genuine spiritual crisis, and that it represented a dimension of reality that demanded serious engagement regardless of skeptical dismissal, remained as vivid and uncompromised as it had been in 1952. Lorraine, who had managed an increasing share of the public-facing work as Ed's health declined, brought her own accumulated 5 decades of experience to every case. She had performed psychic walkthroughs in hundreds of locations, had confronted entities that sought to deceive and manipulate, and had developed the spiritual discernment that allowed her to navigate phenomena that would have overwhelmed investigators without her combination of natural sensitivity and learned discipline. The dangers the Warrens faced in this final period were not only the paranormal threats they had spent a lifetime learning to recognize and counter. The physical toll of 5 decades conducting this work was substantial and cumulative. The nights spent in disturbed locations, the psychic exposure to powerful and hostile presences, the emotional burden of sustained pastoral engagement with families in crisis, all of this had exacted a price that became more visible as both investigators aged. Ed's stroke was not an isolated health event, but part of a pattern of physical consequence that the demanding nature of their work had contributed to over time. Lorraine spoke in later interviews about the spiritual protection they maintained throughout their career, describing it not as a supplementary practice, but as the foundation that made their work possible. Their daily mass attendance, their sustained prayer disciplines, and their close relationships with clergy who provided formal spiritual support were, in Ed's assessment, the only reason they had been able to engage directly with adversarial entities for 50 years without becoming casualties themselves. The protective structure of faith and sacrament was not something added to the investigation methodology, but something woven into its very design, inseparable from the work itself. The case resolutions achieved in these final years reflected the full maturity of the Warren approach. Cases that would have challenged them in the early years of their career were now addressed with confidence, grounded in comprehensive documentation of every analogous situation they had encountered. The network of clergy relationships that Ed and Lorraine had built across 5 decades gave them access to ecclesiastical authority at the highest levels available within the Catholic tradition. This access mattered in the most serious cases, where the difference between a parish-level house blessing and a bishop-authorized full exorcism could be, in Warren's professional judgment, the difference between resolution and continued crisis. The decades Ed had spent building these relationships, earning clerical trust through rigorous documentation and theological seriousness, meant that the NESBR could request and receive the level of intervention that specific cases required. Ed Warren participated in his final active case consultation in 2005, about a year before his death. The case was not public, and the family involved was not identified in NESBR records. Consistent with the privacy protocols the organization had always maintained when families requested confidentiality. But the assessment Ed provided from his Monroe home delivered with the same analytical precision that had characterized his entire career, resulted in an intervention that resolved the situation the family had brought to his attention. Ed Warren died on August 23, 2006, at his home in Monroe, Connecticut, at the age of 79. Lorraine survived him for 13 years, continuing to consult on cases, supporting the work of the NESBR under the direction of their son-in-law Tony Spera, and serving as consultant to the film productions that would bring the Warren legacy to global audiences through the Conjuring franchise and its related films. She died on April 18, 2019, at the age of 92, in the Monroe home where so much of the work they had dedicated their lives to had been planned, conducted, and carefully documented. They are buried together in Stepney Cemetery in Monroe, Connecticut, the very location they had investigated and written about, the site of the White Lady apparition they had documented across many years. The old New England burial ground is now also the resting place of the most significant paranormal investigators in American history. Their grave has become a destination for those who wish to remember them and the work they dedicated their lives to pursuing. The case files of the New England Society for Psychic Research, the books they wrote together, the lectures they delivered at hundreds of university campuses, and the films that dramatized their most famous investigations constitute a legacy that continues to shape how the world understands the paranormal, not merely as entertainment, but as something the Warrens always insisted it was, a genuine dimension of human spiritual experience, requiring not only curiosity, but courage, discernment, and unwavering faith to engage with honestly and survive. Hashtags: number Ed Warren, number Lorraine Warren, number paranormal, number true story, number haunted, number demonology, number ghost stories, number NESBR, number paranormal investigation, number The Conjuring, number supernatural history, number real haunting, number Warren legacy, number Vanishing Roads, number true paranormal. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.